Thank you for tuning in to the Lessons of Vietnam. I'm your host, Bill Dixon, Vietnam 6768, headquarters company, 159 Engineer Group in Long Binh, which was at the time, I believe it was the largest military installation uh, facility anywhere around. It was a big logistics place. I have returned to Vietnam on three different occasions: 2009, 2012, and 2015, and it has definitely changed a whole lot. The money's been poured in over there is just unbelievable. Today's show will be part three of the secrets and mysteries of the Vietnam War. We'll be looking at events that can say why, or what were they thinking, or were they thinking? The mission of the Lessons of Vietnam show is to tell the real stories of the Vietnam War and those involved. If you ever have a question or concern about anything you see on the show, reach out to me and make sure we get the information out correctly. As you can see there on the screen, we are broadcasting from the worldwide headquarters of Nissan Communications in Raleigh, North Carolina. If you need to get in contact with me personally, DixonBill80 at yahoo.com. But more important, during the show, if you have a comment, suggestion, or whatever you want to touch base with us, you can call 919-518-9773, or even better, you can come in on Skype, Computers 2K Voice. Either way, you can reach out to us and we can talk, and I can ask you questions, you can ask me questions, and whatever. So as we go on the show, this is important information to get out. The Veterans Crisis Line, we are still having way too many. One is too many, but we're still having great difference in veterans who are just giving up. I'm on Facebook to several different, numerous, I won't say several because there's about a dozen or something, Vietnam veterans only lines. And it's amazing the last week of the number of veterans who said that they were about as far as they could go. And everybody kind of reached out to them and so forth. So if you're out there and you need to talk to somebody, call this number. If you know it's a Vietnam veteran, be sure to encourage them to call this number, write it down, and encourage them. And let's see if we can't stop this. There's a lot of veterans out there hurting. We need to reach out and take care of them. All right, as we're getting into our show, The Secrets and Mysteries of Vietnam War Part 3. Kind of you see there, North Vietnam and South Vietnam kind of fighting, and South Vietnam is kind of backed up to a cliff there. And one of the shows we're going to be doing coming up pretty soon is going to be the rules of engagement. We have kind of covered it before, but I want to cover it again as exclusive rules of engagement. So let's get right on into the show. Flying Tiger Line, they were a kind of a private company that the government hired to shuttle people around. And Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 had 107 people on it. They were all soldiers, except for one or two, I think, that were civilians. I think I've got it on here someplace. They disappeared on March 16th, 1962, while flying from Guam to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. It was chartered by the U.S. military to fly from California to Saigon. And they were flying from from Clark to Guam, and then Guam into Saigon. But they never got past Guam before they disappeared. Let's see, it says here, such was conducted for 8 days over 5,200,000 square kilometers of ocean, but nothing was ever found. That is a picture of the plane up there. It's a Lockheed plane. March 16th, 1962, Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 disappeared over Western Pacific Ocean. Flying Tiger Line Flight 793 was a Super Constellation prop liner chartered by the United States military that disappeared on the 15th of March, 1962, over the Western Pacific Ocean. It disappeared on the 15th, but it was really kind of picked up on the 16th, depending on the date line where you are. The aircraft was transporting 93 Army men and 3 South Vietnamese from Travis Air Force Base, California to Saigon, Vietnam. After refueling at Anderson Air Base, Guam, the Super Constellation was en route to Clark Air Base in the Philippines when it disappeared. All 107 aboard were declared missing and presumed dead. Now that gives you an idea there. They left flight, landed in Honolulu, Wake Island, and in Guam, and then they disappeared. Flight 739 is last heard from just after midnight, March 16, 1962, 270 miles west of Guam. Okay, it came out of Stars and Stripes. 93 of the passengers were jungle-trained Army Rangers, primarily highly trained electronics and communication specialists. The other 3 were men or members of the Armed Forces of Vietnam. The flight crew, 5 men and 4 women, were all civilians. After reporting in on time at 1600 hours, Guam Center declared the flight to be in uncertainty phase in line with oceanic emergency procedure. This means there is concern about the safety of an aircraft or its occupants because they had not reported in as supposed to be. At 1633, after attempts to contact the aircraft had failed for over an hour, the status was upgraded to alert phase. This means there is an apprehension about the safety of an aircraft and its occupants. The distress phase was initiated at 1933. After continuous attempts to contact the aircraft by all stations and aircraft in the area had failed. They just were disappeared. The distress phase means there is reasonable certainty that the aircraft and its occupants are threatened by grave and imminent danger, including lack of contact and risk of fuel exhaustion. Search and rescue operations were initiated from Guam and the Philippines at 22:27, by which the time the aircraft would have exhausted all of its fuel. Flying Tiger Alliance Flight 739 and all of its occupants were declared lost. The fate of the aircraft was unknown, but then a call came in from a Liberian tanker, SSTL Linson, at 21:05. While the search and rescue operations were in progress, the shipboard lookouts had seen a mid-air explosion at 15:30. They were out in the ocean, and they saw something blow up, the best I could tell, at 15:30. The tanker crew said the night was moonlit and clear, with a quarter of the sky covered by small cumulus clouds and evenly distributed. They first noticed a vapor trail or something similar overhead and slightly to the north of the tanker, moving in an east to west direction. Now you get the idea with the vapor trail, like there was smoke or something coming out. At the time, the tanker was cruising on a heading of 77 degrees. The vapor trail passed behind a cloud, and then there was an intense, luminous explosion consisting of a white nucleus surrounded by a reddish-orange periphery with the radial lines of reddish-orange light, kind of like you see in the picture there. Okay. The explosion consisted of 2 pulses, lasting 2 to 3 seconds. The crew believed they saw 2 flaming objects of unequal brightness and size fall at disparate speeds into the sea. After they fell, a crew member noticed a small, bright target on the ship's radar bearing 270 degrees at a range of 17 miles. They aligned the heading of the vessel with the star, and the captain found that the tanker's heading was now 270 degrees, the same as the bearing of the target seen on radar. The tanker continued to this position of the radar target, but found nothing there. They searched an area for 5.5 hours, but found no trace of wreckage or debris. The subsequent search was cited at the time as one of the most extensive ever conducted. No trace to aircraft or occupants were ever found. They just went poof. No explanation was ever found either. Investigators found that although the aircraft was properly certified and was in airworthy condition, a few weeks earlier it had exhibited significant power loss to one of its engines after 3.5 hours of flight, which had not been explained. But after minor maintenance, it appeared to be in good repair. There was no sign that day that there were any mechanical issues with the flight. And as we all say, and the plot thickens. The investigation found that the flight line and ramp areas at Honolulu, Wake Island, and Guam were not secure, and anyone could enter and access non-military aircraft parked on airfields. Specifically at Guam, the last stop, the aircraft was left unattended in a dimly lit area for some time. Now, why is that significant? An explosion, as witnessed by the tanker, happened at the point when Flight 739 should have been radioed in for the next position report. This seems extremely coincidental and is one of the reasons why many believe the aircraft may have been sabotaged. In addition, a second Flying Tiger Line flight was destroyed that very same day. An identical Lockheed Super Constellation said they'd been carrying secret military cargo, also departed Travis Air Force Base on the same day and encountered difficulties several hours later. The pilot appeared to encounter issues on the instrument approach and crashed short of the runway. And that is a picture of the crashed plane. The main landing gear was torn off, and then the aircraft caught fire. 6 crew members received minor injuries, and one was trapped in a cockpit and died in the fire. We got a lot of coincidences here. 2 Tiger Airlines crashed in the same day. They all left from the same airport, which was not secured. It's like, well, let's put a bomb, but we don't know which one of them to put a bomb on, so we're going to put a bomb on both of them. Neither the passengers nor crew members' names are on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. And no government agencies, Army, Air Force, Defense Department, National Archives, or State Department, CIA, admit to possessing records related to the soldiers and their mission. These were all highly trained Army Rangers. And they were going to Vietnam. Why aren't they listed on the wall? A petition has been launched to get the names added to the wall. Proponents face an uphill battle and need to prove that the plane was headed to Vietnam for a combat mission. Well, obviously the men who were on the plane were going for a combat mission. I don't necessarily the plane, which had, They were tourists, yeah. Well, Saigon was known as the Paris of the Orient, which has been impossible without documentation or through the special intervention of elected officials. That means an elected person has to stand up and say something. They were flying into harm's way, said Frank Allen, the Massachusetts man who started a change.org petition in October. Allen is related to one of the men, Sergeant Howard Gallipo Jr., by marriage. Had they survived and landed, they might have died under different circumstances. The military treats it like a car accident. They should be honored for what they did. Okay. Allen's petition calls for 1,000 signatures, although they are hoping for many more. The petition will be sent out to Defense Department officials and it closes in October. Tommy Joe Myers said that after years of being turned away and threatened when pressing for answers and recognition, he has lost all hope. It's hurtful they won't put these guys' names on the wall, he said. People need to know what these guys sacrifice. Just give them the same courtesy and respect other guys have gotten. What happened to the flight and those aboard? Flying Tiger Flight 739 went missing March 16, 1962, and the names are not on the wall. Now, Saigon fell, marking the end of the Vietnam War on April 29, 1975. The Mayaquez incident, which took place between the Khmer Rouge and the United States, that is, the Khmer Rouge was the Cambodian communist, which took the United States on from May 12th, 15th through the 15th in 1975. And those names are on the wall. There's right at 40 of them altogether, and their names on the wall. Who decides whose names are on the wall? It's actually by the Department of Defense. There was a ship that was in a training accident, and was a bunch of sailors were killed, and there's been a petition to get those men's names put on the wall because it was during the war, and their names have not been put on the wall. So there's several groups of people out there. Excuse me. Okay, the Marquez incident, which took place between the Khmer Rouge and the United States from 12th to the 15th, 1975. It's been a beautiful day here today, and I don't know where I'm getting in trouble with the pollen than it used to be here. What? And that was now the fall of Saigon was the official date of the end of the Vietnam War, but now they're saying that the Marquez incident was the last official battle of the Vietnam War. So it's like everything else with the Vietnam, what is first and what is last is up to subjective thinking. The names that Americans killed, as well as those of 3 U.S. Marines who were left behind on the islands of Koh Tang after the battle and were subsequently executed by Khmer Rouge, are the last names on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. The merchant ship's crew, whose seizure at sea had prompted the U.S. attack, had been released and in good health, unknown to the U.S. Marines or the United States command of the operation before the Marines' attack. It was only known engagement between U.S. ground forces and the Khmer Rouge. And that, by the way, is a picture of the Marquez. And the Marquez left Saigon, and there's been some question just what was the cargo of the ship. They were within the 13 miles limit that Cambodia claimed is their land. Incident began on the afternoon of May 12, 1975, as the American container ship SS Marquez passed near, and I'm not, as Emma says, it's Palau Way Island en route to Satahip, Thailand, in recognized international sea lanes claimed as territorial waters by Cambodia. At 14:18, a Khmer Rouge Naval Force swift boat was sighted approaching the Marquez. And you can see there's a picture of the Marquez that came out of a magazine. That is when they were rescuing, they went on the Marquez to rescue the sailors and discovered they were not there. You can see some of the patches that came out of it. The Marquez, battleship Marquez, and it's the they call it the Koh Tang Country Club or something like that. I forgot exactly how it goes, but hey. The Khmer Rouge fired across the bow of the Marquez, and when Captain Charles T. Miller ordered the engine room to slow down to maneuver speed to avoid the machine gun fire, the Khmer Rouge then fired rocket-propelled grenades across the bow of the ship. Marquez Captain Miller ordered the transmission of an SOS and then stopped the ship. U.S. President Gerald Ford, remember, Nixon resigned. Gerald Ford became president. So how many presidents do we have involved in the Vietnam War? U.S. President Gerald Ford was informed of the seizure of the Marquez at his morning briefing with his Deputy Assistant for National Security Affairs, Brent Shelkoff. At 21:05 Cambodian time, a meeting of the National Security Council was convened to discuss the situation. Meanwhile, the National Military Command Center ordered Admiral Noel Gaylor, Commander-in-Chief, United States Pacific Command, to launch reconnaissance aircraft to locate the Marquez. We knew it had been captured, we just didn't know where it was. The members of the National Security Council were determined to end the crisis decisively, believing that the fall of South Vietnam less than 2 weeks before and the forced withdrawal of the United States from Cambodia, Operation Eagle Pool, and South Vietnam Operation Frequent Wind had severely damaged the U.S. reputation. So as we go on, we were worried about the United States not looking good in the world because they had kicked us out, according to this, kicked us out of Cambodia and kicked us out of Vietnam, and now they've captured one of our ships. They also wish to avoid comparisons to the Pueblo incident of 1968, where the failure to promptly use military force to halt the hijacking of a U.S. intelligence ship by North Korea led to an 11-month hostage situation. By the way, North Korea still has the Pueblo. In fact, they have it up for tourists to go look at. It was determined that keeping the Marquez and its crew away from the Cambodian mainland was essential. As the United States had no diplomatic contact with the Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia, President Ford instructed Secretary of State Henry Kissinger to urge the People's Republic of China to persuade the Khmer Rouge to release Marquez and its crew. Okay. The 3rd Marine Amphibious Force assigned Task Force 79.9 with recovering the Marquez and designated D Company, 1st to the 4th Marines in the Philippines, as the unit that would actually retake the Marquez. But General Burns wanted additional forces, and orders were sent to the 3rd Marine Division on Okinawa. The 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, was then on alert as a primary air contingency reaction force. But most of the 1st and the 9th were ending their tours of duty and were not subject to further extension of their tours. In other words, their time was up and it was time for them to go home, which happens quite often with troops in the field. It's hard to realize that you have to plan an invasion or whatever to fit around transfer ins and out of people. When people first transfer in, they're probably new or either been in the military and been with the unit. So quite often there was a problem initially in Vietnam was some units were due to rotate back and they couldn't go out and do a mission or whatever because there were too many new people coming in. Okay. We're not subject to further extension of the tours except in the case of emergency. 3rd Marine Amphibious Force requested extension of 1st and 9th tour, but this was refused. In other words, they asked if their soldiers could be held over long enough to do this, but it was refused. The 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Randall W. Austin, was then in a training exercise on Okinawa, and it received orders on the night of 13th of May to return to camp and prepare for departure by air at dawn on the 14th of May. On the morning of 14th of May, they had boarded Air Force C-141s at Kadena Air Base to fly to Thailand. The 9th Marine Regiment had been the first U.S. ground combat forces committed to the Vietnam War in 1965. But in May 1975, only a few of the officers and NCOs from the 2nd 9th had seen combat in Vietnam. In other words, they were all basically new troops. That's the reason they were in Okinawa training. On May 13th, General Burns and his 7th Air Force staff developed a contingency plan to retake the Marquez using an assault force composed of men of the 56th Air Force Security Squadron. 75 volunteers from the 56th would be dropped into the containers on the decks of the Marquez on the morning of 14th of May. So now we have the Air Force going in to rescue the Marquez, and we have the Marines coming in to, we don't know yet because we don't know where the Marquez is and we don't know where the soldiers are, but we got 2 different groups coming in. In preparation for this assault, 5 HH-53s and 7 CH-53s were ordered to proceed to Utapao Royal Thai Navy Airfield for staging. At approximately 21:30, one of the 21st SOS CH-53s, called sign Knife 13, crashed, killing 18 security police and 5-man crew. We haven't even got started yet, and we've already lost 23. Early in the morning of May 14th, the Khmer Rouge loaded the Marquez crew into one of its fishing boats, and they left Koh Tang, following 2 of the swift boats on the heading for Koh Tang. Two F-111s swept past the fishing boat, followed by a pair of F-4s and a pair of A-7s, which began firing in front of the swift boats and then directly at the swift boats, causing one of them to turn back to Koh Tang. The jets were then joined by an AC-130H Spectre gunship from the 388th Tactical Fighter Wing, which had proceeded to engage the second swift boat with its cannons. An AD-7D then sprayed the swift boat with its 20-millimeter cannon, striking it. The fighters then came at the fishing boat, dropping bombs and firing their cannons into the water in front of it and spraying the boat with shrapnel. The fighter crews then reported back that 30 to 40 Caucasians had been seen on board the fishing boat, which is probably why they quit shooting at it, because they saw what they thought were Americans on it. On the afternoon of 14th of May, General Burns received the order to proceed with the simultaneous assault on Koh Tang and the Maquis, time to begin just before sunrise on the 15th of May. D Company, 1st to the 4th Marines, would retake the Maquis, while the 1st to the 9th Marines would rescue the crew on Koh Tang. Now, I thought the Air Force was going to go in and take the Maquis. You can kind of get the idea that sometimes the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. With minimal intelligence, available regarding the geography of Koh Tang, the commander of the 2nd and 9th and his staff took off in a U-21 to make an aerial reconnaissance of the island. Arriving over Koh Tang at 1600 hours, they were prevented from closely approaching the island in order not to compromise the secret of the mission or draw ground fire. But they determined that the island was so covered in jungle that the only two viable landing zones available were beaches on the west and east shores of the northern portion of Koh Tang. And you can see some of the different helicopters we're talking about. At 2100 hours, the rescue plan was finalized. 600 Marines from the 2nd and 9th, composed of Golf and Echo companies, were assigned to conduct a combat assault in 5 CH-53 Knifes and 3 HH-53 Jolly Greens and seize and hold Koh Tang. 2 helicopters would make a diversionary assault on the west beach, while 6 helicopters would make the main assault on the wider east beach. The East Beach force would move to the nearby compound where the Maquis crew was believed to be held, and then move across and link up with the West Beach force. 2 more waves of helicopters would be required to deploy all the 2nd and 9th to Koh Tang. The flight from Utapao to Koh Tang was a 4-hour round trip. It was estimated that only 20 to 30 Khmer Rouge were on Koh Tang. The information regarding the heavy anti-aircraft fire coming from Koh Tang and the number of gunboats present was not passed on to the Marines. A unit of 57 Marines from the Delta Company, 1st to the 4th, together with volunteers from the Military Sea Lift Command to get the Maquis underway, an explosive ordnance disposal team and a Cambodian linguist would be transferred by 3 HH-53 Jolly Greens to the Holt, which was scheduled to arrive on station at dawn for a ship-to-ship boarding of the Maquis, 1 hour after the assault of Koh Tang began. 2 additional CH-53s, because of their super firepower, all the HH-53s were used for troop lift, were tasked as combat search and rescue helicopters, support of an HC-13OP King Command and Control aircraft, which you see in the picture there, the 56th Rescue Squadron. Okay, that was the Air Force guys that we talked about earlier. Okay. Unknown to the Americans, then converging on Koh Tang, none of the Maquis crew were on the island, and it was heavily defended by over 100 Khmer Rouge. They thought there was only 20 or 30, and those were just supply clerks and cooks and so forth. The Khmer Rouge defense on Koh Tang were intended to counter the Vietnamese, not the Americans, because the Cambodians and the Vietnamese communists were not getting along. They were fighting each other. Following the fall of Saigon, the Vietnam People's Army moved quickly to take control of a number of islands formerly controlled by South Vietnam and the other islands contested between Vietnam and Cambodia. So that's why there were so many soldiers and well-armed soldiers there, because they were trying to keep the island from being taken over by the Vietnamese communists. The Khmer Rouge commander of Kampong Som district, Kampong Som district was M. Sun, excuse me, was also given responsibility for securing Koh Tang, and on 1st of May, he took forces of 100 men to Koh Tang to defend the islands against attack by the Vietnamese. Sa Minh was given responsibility for the defense of Palaway, which is one of the other islands. Now, you remember there was only 2 beaches they could come in on, the East Beach and the West Beach. On the East Beach, 2 heavily machine guns had been dug in at each end of the beach, and fortified firing positions had been built every 20 meters behind a sand berm connected to a shallow zigzag trench. 2 M60 machine guns, B-40 recordless rifles, and 2 DK-82 mortars grenade launchers were in the firing position. That was pretty good for 20 or 30 men. On the West Beach, a heavy machine gun, an M60, and a B-40 recordless rifles and a 75mm recordless rifle were dug into connecting firing positions. In other words, they had the crisscross. North of each beach was a 60mm mortar, and south of the beaches was an 81mm mortar that could fire on either beach. In other words, the communist M. Sung had pretty much scoped out the beach. He knew that the only way people could get into the beach because of the jungles and so forth was those 2 beaches. Ammunition was stored and dug in bunkers, one behind each beach, with a 3rd ammunition dump located in M. Sung's command post in the jungle south of the beaches. They were ready. On their arrival, Captain Miller was taken to the senior Khmer Rouge commander, where he was subject to a cursory interrogation before being asked if he could talk to American planes from the Maquis. In other words, the Cambodians had captured the ship, but then when the American planes started flying in, they got nervous. The Khmer Rouge explained they had already lost 3 boats and numerous men, and were obviously anxious to call off the American bombers. Captain Miller explained that if they returned to the ship and restarted its engines, they could then generate electricity to call their office in Bangkok, which then could contact the military. In other words, nobody could contact the military direct. He had to call his office, so his office could call the military. Sound like a perfect storm, as the old movie was. The Khmer Rouge radioed instructions to their higher command and then gave approval for Captain Miller and 9 men to return to the Maquis. As darkness was falling, it was decided that they would return to the Maquis the following morning on the 15th of May. The assault on Koh Tang. At 6:12, 8 helicopters, 5 CH-53 Knifes, and 3 HH-53 Jolly Greens on the Koh Tang assault force approached the 2 landing zones on Koh Tang. At the West Beach, the first section of the 2 CH-53 helicopters came in at 06:20 hours. The first helicopter, Knife 21, landed safely, but while offloading, its Marines came under heavy automatic weapons fire, destroying an engine. It managed to take off, protected by suppressive fire from the second CH-53, Knife 22, and ditched 1.6 kilometers offshore. So they had to ditch the plane or the helicopter. Knife 22 was damaged so severely that it turned back with its Marines, including the Golf Company commander, still aboard, escorted by Jolly Green 11 and Jolly Green 12, and crash landed at Trat Province on the Thai coast. Let's see, now that is so far the one early helicopter that crashed, and we have 2 here, where its passengers were picked up by Jolly Green 12 and returned to Utapo. At 06:30, the CH-53s approached the East Beach, encountered intense automatic weapons and RPG fire. rocket-propelled grenades. For those of you who don't know what RPG is, fired from entrenched Khmer Rouge. Knife 31 was hit by 2 RPGs, which ignited its left fuel tank and ripped away the nose of the helicopter. It crashed in a fireball 50 meters offshore. A pilot, 5 Marines, and 2 Navy corpsmen were killed in the crash. Another Marine drowned swimming from the wreck. And 3 Marines were killed by gunfire trying to reach the beach. A 10th Marine died of his wounds while clinging to the burning wreckage. The surviving 10 Marines and 3 Air Force crewmen were forced to swim for 2 hours before being picked up by the gig of the arriving Henry B. Wilson. Among the Marine survivors was the battalion's forward air controller, who used an Air Force survival radio while swimming to direct A-7 airstrikes against the island until the battery failed. In other words, he's out there floating in the water, and he's on the radio calling in, telling the planes coming in where to shoot until the battery runs out. Okay. The second CH-53 Knife 23 was hit by an RPG, which blew off the tail section and crash landed on the East Beach. But it successfully offloaded its 20 Marines and crew of 5. They set up a defensive perimeter, and the Knife 23 co-pilot used his survival radio to call in airstrikes. But they would remain cut off from both reinforcements and rescue for 12 hours. They were on kind of an island to themselves for 12 hours. Knife 32 was inbound to the East Beach when it was hit by an RPG and boarded its landing, instead heading out over the West Beach to Knife 21 crash site, where it dumped fuel and proceeded to rescue the 3 Knife 21 crewmen. 2 other sections of the first wave, consistent of the remaining 4 helicopters, were diverted from the East Beach to the West Beach and eventually landed all their Marines between 0630 and 0700 hours. Although the final insertion by Jolly Green 41 required support from the AC-130 Spectre gunships in order to penetrate the Khmer Rouge fire on its 5th attempt. In other words, what we're saying was that the Jolly Green with the Marines on it had to go in 5 times before they could find out how to get in there, because the plane there got enough fire to keep the heads down. Knife 32, Jolly Green 41, and Jolly Green 42 eventually landed 81 Marines on the West Beach under command of the company executive officer, and Jolly Green 43 landed 29 Marines on the battalion command post and mortar platoon a kilometer to the southwest. So they were still spread out. By 0700, 109 Marines and 5 Air Force crewmen were on Koh Tang. Okay, they were almost even there, except the other guys were dug in. But in 3 isolated beach areas and in close contact with the Khmer Rouge troops. So they're divided up into 3 different areas. So let's just say there was 30 Marines in each place. And a whole lot. The Marines at the northern end of West Beach attempted to move down the beach to link up with Colonel Austin's command element to the south, but was beaten back by heavy Khmer Rouge fire, which killed Lance Corporal Ashton Lowen. While isolated, the Marines were able to use their 81mm mortars as fire support for their contingents and devise a makeshift communications network for controlling support airstrikes by U.S. Air Force A-7s, which you see there in the F-4 aircraft. It was decided that the platoon isolated on the East Beach should be extracted, and following suppressive fire from the AC-130 Jolly Greens, 13 landed there at 8:15 amid hail of machine gun fire, but it had landed some 100 millimeters away from the Marines, who were reluctant to risk running to the helicopter, and Jolly Green 13 took off with its fuel lines ruptured and made an emergency landing in Thailand. Of the 8 helicopters assaulting Koh Tang, 3 had been destroyed, Knife 21, Knife 23, and Knife 31. And 4 others damaged too severely to continue operation, Knife 22, Knife 32, Jolly Green 41, and Jolly Green 42. And of the helicopters used in the Marquez recapture, Jolly Green 13 had been severely damaged in the East Beach rescue attempt. And you can see there at the beach, a little bit of the beaches that were available there. So this left only 3 helicopters, All HH-53s, Jolly Greens 11, 12, and 43 are the original 11 available to bring in the follow-up forces, but BLT 2nd, the 9th Battalion, 2nd and 9th Marines, the two CH-53s, Knife 51 and 52, whose mission had been to search and rescue the last available helicopters, were reassigned to carry troops. The 5 helicopters pick up 127 Marines of the second wave at Utah in between 09 and 1000 hours. They picked up 127 Marines there in Thailand to bring back to Koh Tang Island. At 11:50, Knife 52, Knife 51, and Jolly Green 43 arrived at Koh Tang and prepared to land on East Beach. As Knife 52 approached, fire punctured its fuel tank, and the pilot aborted the landing and headed back to Utah, leaking fuel. Knife 51, Jolly Green 43 also abandoned their landing and assumed a holding pattern. Everything seemed to be going wrong. At 0600, the Khmer Rouge Information and Propaganda Minister, Hu Nim, made a radio broadcast announcing that the Marquez and its crew would be released. The transmission was intercepted by the CIA station in Bangkok, translated and delivered to the White House by 7:15. The White House was skeptical of the Khmer Rouge message and released a press statement at 8:15 saying the United States military operations would continue until the crew of Marquez was released. Secretary Kissinger had of his own accord, make sure I get this back again, Secretary Kissinger on his own accord ordered the delay in an airstrike by planes from the Coral Sea on the Koh Tang oil storage complex and Ream Airfield at 0630 on Rung Sam Lim. The crew of the Marquez were informed they would be allowed to return to their ship after having first agreed to a statement they had not been mistreated. Even the communists were trying to cover their butts. At 7:15, the Marquez crew was loaded aboard the Thai fishing boat, the Sinavera, which had been itself captured by the Khmer Rouge 5 months earlier, escorted by a second boat with Samin and other Khmer Rouge once away from the Rong Sam Lim. The second boat picked up the Khmer Rouge guards from the Sinavera and instructed the crew to return to the Marquez and call off the American planes. In other words, the communists had all they wanted, and it sounds like the Marines had all they wanted. At 09:35, an Orbiton P-3 Orion spotted Senevu, and the Wilson was ordered to intercept her. P-3 Orion was kind of a spotter plane. Ordered to intercept her, originally thinking it was a Khmer Rouge gunboat. The P-3 then identified that Caucasians aboard at 9:49. The Marquez crew was brought aboard the Wilson, which is the American ship that was going to pull up with them. Confirmation of the release of the crew was sent to the White House, and at 11:27, President Ford went on U.S. national television announcing the recovery of the Marquez and the rescue of its crew, but obscuring the fact that the crew had in fact been released by the Khmer Rouge. It just sounded better that we went in and rescued them. The U.S. Joint, and we still had Marines on the island, by the way, at that time. The U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff decided that with the ship recaptured and the crew released, the ship was recaptured, okay? That means we took it back. They captured, and we captured it back from them. But the fact that they gave us the ship back, that was just a detail. And the crew release, further reinforcement of Koh Tang was unnecessary. And at 11:55, they ordered the U.S. forces to immediately cease all offensive operations against the Khmer Rouge Republic and to disengage and withdraw all forces from the operating as soon as possible. You remember that last 127 Marines were heading to the island? Here in this order, the Orbiton EC-130 Cricket recalled the second assault wave. So they did call them off. The only problem was there's 107 still on the island, if I remember what we said a while ago. The helicopters with the second wave reversed course until Lieutenant Colonel Austin on the ground at Koh Tang convinced the commander of the 7th Air Force that the reinforcements were necessary to prevent his units from being overrun. The orders rescinded at 12:10. The left hand and the right hand, okay. The second wave carrying the Marines from Knife 22 and a platoon from Company E had originally taken off at staggered times between 0900 and 1000. With reversal, of course, it arrived on Koh Tang was seriously delayed. At 12:10, Knife 51, followed by Jolly Green 43, 11, and 12, successfully landed 100 additional Marines and evacuated 9 wounded on the West Beach. Now we have a total of 225 Marines, 205 on the West Beach, and 20 Marines and 5 airmen on the East Beach. But that's had to be a lonely place on the East Beach. About the same time, Lieutenant Colonel Austin's isolated command unit planned a link up of its small contingent with the bulk of Goff Company at the northern end of the West Beach. Using mortar fire and A-7 airstrikes to clear Khmer Rouge in the jungle between the two forces, it reached the Goff Company perimeter at 12:45. Okay. By 1400, firing on the West Beach had reduced substantially as M. Sung had moved most of his men back from the beaches, with only 3-man patrols maintaining the pressure on the 2 Marine enclaves. Lieutenant Colonel Austin asked the Cricket if he should attempt to push across the island to link up with the isolated unit on the East Beach, but it was advised that another helicopter pickup would be attempted first. At 14:15, Jolly Green's 11 and 43 approached East Beach, but were repulsed by heavy fire. Jolly Green 43 had a fuel line damage, but made an emergency landing on the Coral Sea at 14:36, where it was repaired and returned to service by 1700 hours. During the attempt landing of by Jolly Green 43, fire was seen coming from a semi-submerged Swift boat that had been shot up by an AC-130 the previous day. Those guys had stayed on the boat the whole time. That was by the communist Swift boat. A-7 aircraft were called in to destroy the boat with their 20-millimeter cannons. At 16:20 hours, Nell 68 and Air Force OV-10, that's what an OV-10 looks like, forward aircraft controller, arrived and took over the direction of air support. At 16:23, Nell 68 called on the Wilson to use its 5-inch guns to destroy the semi-submerged Swift boat. This change in controllers marked a turning point in the quality of airborne firepower available to the Marines, because for the first time that day they had airborne observer exclusively dedicated to providing accurate and timely close air support. Makes a big difference. At 1700, M. Sung gathered his forces and moved back up the island to secure an ammunition dump that lay between the west and east beaches. He was surprised to find the dump intact and no Marines lying in ambush. Now resupplied, his men would be able to increase the pressure on the Marines again. Now note, this picture was actually taken on the Koh Tang Island by Carrie Turner, the cousin of Joseph Hargrove, one of the missing Marines we're going to be talking about. And I think I forgot which one now. That's the guy in the blue shirt in the back is Carrie Turner, and I'm not certain which one of those is M. Sung. I don't know whether he's in that picture or not. I forgot. At 1800 hours, as the sun began setting, a third attempt to rescue the East Beach forces was attempted by using Jolly Green 11 as the rescue ship, and with ground gunfire support from Jolly Green 12 and Knife 51 and the gig from the Wilson Manning 4 M60s. Now, when it says gig, we're talking about a small boat that came out from the ship Wilson, American ship Wilson. Nell 68 first ordered gun runs by an AC-130, followed by F-4s and F-7s along the edge of the East Beach. As this was going on, 5 C-130s arrived over Koh Tang carrying daisy cutter bombs, a 15,000-pound device and the largest conventional explosive weapon in the United States arsenal at the time. And that bomb just kind of clears the land. Not seeing any practical use for the Blue 82s, Nell 68 ordered them dropped well south of the Marines' position. In other words, What are you going to do with these big suckers? You can't drop them where the Marines are. So he dropped them well south of their Marines' position. At 8:15, Jolly Green 11 approached the East Beach, but did not actually set down because the hulk of Knife 23 was sitting on the beach. Instead, First Lieutenant Donald Backlund, the pilot, skillfully hovered the helicopter several feet off the ground just north of the original beach landing zone. The extraction was difficult because the helicopter would seesaw up and down. Only a few Marines at a time could board the helicopter's rear ramp in this fashion. In other words, the back of the helicopter, the Jolly Green, the back of the helicopter, and the Marines had to jump up and climb on that while it was moving up and down. Only a few Marines at a time could board the helicopter's rear ramp in this fashion by timing their jump to coincide with the downward motion of the aircraft. Jolly Green 11 was hit numerous times, but managed to transport its cargo of 20 Marines and 5 airmen to the Coral Sea. And you can see there the picture of a daisy cutter with kind of give you a perspective with men standing there. It was only 4.5 feet in diameter. Shortly after Jolly Green 11 evacuated the East Beach, the first Blue 82 was dropped, causing a huge explosion and sending a shockwave across the West Beach. Lieutenant Colonel Austin quickly called the Cricket with the instructions that no more of the bombs should be dropped. As a moonless night fell over Koh Tang, the remaining 2 helicopters, Knife 51, hastily repaired Jolly Green 43, were joined by Jolly Green 44 that had been out of service in its Nakhon Phantom base, had been repaired and flown to the area. At 1840, this force began to withdraw the remaining 205 Marines from the West Beach, protected by AC-130 fire and naval gunfire support from the H.B. Wilson and its gig. The first load of 40 Marines were lifted out at 1840 hours by Knife 51 and flown to the Coral Sea, followed by 54 taken aboard Jolly Green 43. As Jolly Green 44 picked up a load of 44 Marines, the remaining Marines in the shrinking West Beach perimeter came under intense attack and were in danger of being overrun. The trip to the Coral Sea was 30 minutes round trip, so the pilot, First Lieutenant Bob Blau, decided to deliver his Marines to the Harold F. E. Holt, the nearest ship to Koh Tang, made in complete darkness while hovering over the ship with only its front wheels touching down. Within 5 minutes, Jolly Green 44 returned and picked up 34 Marines, leaving 32 still on the island. In other words, there was nobody could say, "Oh, time out, we got to get our men out, time out." That didn't happen. They had to get them out the best way they could. Jolly Green 44 was suffering engine trouble and this time headed to the Coral Sea. Finally, at 2000 hours, Knife 51 landed and began loading in the dark and under fire. Having loaded everyone save for themselves, Captain Davis and Gunnery Sergeant McNamara combed the beach looking for stragglers. K-51 pararescueman Techno Sergeant Wayne Fisk was at the end of the ramp when 2 more Marines stumbled out of the darkness. Techno Sergeant Fisk asked Captain Davis if all his men were aboard, and he confirmed they were. But Technical Sergeant Fisk combed the beach one last time for stragglers. Finding none, he leaped onto the hovering CH-53, and at 2010, Knife 51 left Koh Tang for the Coral Sea. Due to intense direct and indirect fire during the operation, the bodies of Marines and airmen were killed in action or left where they fell, including Lance Corporal Ashton Loney, whose body was left behind in darkness during the evacuation of the West Beach. With each withdrawal, the Marines contracted their commitment on the West Beach. In other words, they got it smaller and smaller. Lance Corporal John S. Standfast, squad leader, 3rd Squad, 3rd Platoon, Company E, and his squad covered Company G's withdrawal. During the reduction of the perimeter, he then single-handedly directed a pullback of his own squad. But before withdrawing to the safety of the new perimeter, Standfast and the platoon guide, Sergeant Anderson, would move forward to the old perimeter and ensure that no member of the company inadvertently had been left behind, each time checking every foxhole. Due to intense direct and indirect fire during the operation, the bodies of Marines and airmen who were killed in action were left where they fell, including Lance Corporal Ashton Loney, we already talked about, whose body was left behind on the West Beach. As the company E commander, Captain Michael K. Stahl, prepared to board Jolly Green 44, he informed Captain Davis that all his men were inside the perimeter, not realizing that 3 Marines of an M60 machine gun team had set up a firing position behind a rocky outcrop beyond the right flank of the perimeter. Even as Knife 51 left the West Beach, there was confusion as to whether any Marines remained on Koh Tang. The pilot, Lieutenant Brim, radioed the forward air controller that some Marines aboard claimed there were still fellow Marines on the ground. But this was soon contradicted by Captain Davis, who said that all Marines were off Koh Tang. 2 hours after the evacuation was completed, with the Koh Tang Marines dispersed among 3 Navy ships, the company E commander, Captain Stahl, discovered that 3 of his Marines were missing. The Marines checked all the Navy ships but could not locate Lance Corporal Joseph N. Hargrove, you see in the first picture there, and Larry Hall, and Private Danny G. Marshall, members of the 3-man machine gun team, which had been assigned to protect the right flank of the constantly shrinking perimeter during the final evacuation. Sergeant Anderson was the last member of the Marine Force to see Hall, Hargrove, and Marshall alive at about 2000 hours, when he ordered them to move back to the new position, which located to the left of the position occupied by Captain Davis. In other words, they were told to move to a different position. A rescue operation was proposed using Marine volunteers aboard the only 3 serviceable helicopters. On the Coral Sea, the commander of the Task Force 73, Rear Admiral R.T. Coogan, met with Lieutenant Colonel Alston and Captain Davis, Gunnery Sergeant McNamara, and Lieutenant Coulter, who had just arrived from Subic Bay with 14-man U.S. Navy SEAL team, to consider possible options. Admiral Coogan asked Lieutenant Coulter to take the Wilson gig ashore in daylight, unarmed, with a white flag. With leaflets dropped in the Wilson broadcasting the crew's intention to recover the American bodies and determine the status of the missing men if possible. Let me read that again. To take the Wilson gig ashore in daylight, unarmed, under a white flag. But Lieutenant Coulter was skeptical and instead proposed taking his team ashore for a night reconnaissance, but this was refused by Admiral Coogan. Admiral Coogan had to weigh up the order from 7th Fleet to cease hostile actions against the Khmer Rouge against the lack of evidence that any of the men were still alive. He decided there would be no rescue mission unless there was some confirmation that the 3 Marines were still alive. Well, I don't have it here, but I can tell you there was confirmation that the 3 Marines were alive. Kerry Turner has talked about it on numerous shows we've had here. They have discovered the recordings of one of the 3 Marines, probably Hargrove, since he was a ranking officer there, that he did talk with the ship. The following morning, the Wilson cruised back and forth between the west and east beaches for 3 hours, broadcasting messages in English, French, and Khmer, saying they had no hostile intent, but simply wished to retrieve any U.S. personnel dead or alive on the Koh Tang and would send an unarmed boat ashore if the Khmer Rouge signaled them. Half of the Wilson crew was on the deck scanning the beaches and jungle for any sign of the missing Marines, but no signal was received from the Khmer Rouge or the missing Marines. Neither group trusted the other one. With no indication that the 3 Marines were still alive and the certainty that more lives would be lost in any forced rescue attempt, a return to Koh Tang was ruled out and the Wilson departed the area. Hargrove, Hall, and Marshall were declared missing in action, and then on 21st of July, 1976, their status was changed, killed in action, body not recovered. In 1985, an eyewitness report indicated that a wounded American had been captured in Koh Tang after the assault and was subsequently executed. In 1999, MSOM approached the Joint Task Force full accounting that's the people who are looking for for the remains of American soldiers, on learning they had been looking for further information regarding the events of Koh Tang. MSOM advised that on the morning of 16th of May, he ordered his men to search the West Beach for any remaining Americans. About 100 meters from the beach, one of the Khmer Rouge was hit by an M16 fire. The Khmer Rouge then fired mortars and encircled the firing position, capturing one American with a leg wound. M. Sung's description of the American matched that of Lance Corporal Joseph Hargrove. The Khmer Rouge continued their search and located an abandoned M60 machine gun, various equipment, and the covered body of a black American soldier. M. Sung ordered the dead American soldier, presumably Lance Corporal Ashton Looney, buried and the prisoner taken to his headquarters. When M. Sung was advised that the Khmer Rouge hit by the M16 fire had died, he ordered the American to be shot. Joseph Hargrove was the man they think was shot. Joseph's brother was killed in Vietnam in 1968 during Tet. Approximately 1 week after the assault, M. Sung's men noticed that the leftover food was being disturbed, and on searching, they found boot prints in the mud and set up a night ambush. And on the third night, they captured 2 Americans matching the description of PFC Gary Hall and Private Danny Marshall. M. Sung radioed Koh Tang and was ordered to deliver the Americans to the mainland. The following morning, the 2 Americans were taken by boat to the mainland and driven to the Ta Nien Pagoda near Sihanouk. That's the Cambodian capital, and I can never have been able to pronounce that. So, okay, whatever Amnon said, where they were stripped to their underwear and shackled. After 1 week, on orders from Phnom Penh, each American was beaten to death with a B-40 rocket launcher. The body of Hall was buried in a shallow grave near the beach, while that of Marshall was dumped on a beach cove, which kept washing up. Okay. Recovered in 1991 by the Joint Staff later found bone fragments that might have belonged to Hall and Marshall, but DNA tests provided inconclusive due to small pieces of fragments. Hargrove, Hall, and Marshall all received Purple Hearts from the U.S. Marine Corps. However, Hargrove's family did not receive the award until 1999 after investigations. Journalist and author Weddingham published several articles on popular magazines about his findings. In 2007, Hargrove's cousin, Carrie Turner, began a campaign to have Joint POW-MIA Accounting Command, the successful agent to JTFA, return to Koh Tang to search for Hargrove's remains. In October 2008, JPAC was reported to have found 4 sets of remains in an area indicating by M. Sung as being where the American suspected to be Hargrove was buried. One of the sets of remains was said to be a Caucasian in nature, but DNA analysis was needed before the identity could be confirmed. The U.S. military received much criticism for its handling of the incident. In addition to the failure of intelligence to determine the whereabouts of the crew of Marquez and the presence of a sizable hospital force on Koh Tang, the timing of the operation was questioned until it became clear that combat had been underway 4 hours before the crew was released. Within the services, the Marines in particular were critical of the ad hoc nature of the joint operation and the perceived pressure from the administration for hasty action. Although the success of Operation Frequent Wind had been basis for many decisions made during the crisis. Now, Operation Frequent Wind was the mass evacuation of people from Saigon. As you can see how well that was, they're pushing multi-million-dollar helicopters over the side. Operation Frequent Wind was the final phase of the evacuation of American civilians at risk Vietnamese from Saigon, South Vietnam, prior to the takeover of the city by the North Vietnamese People's Army and it followed Saigon. It was carried out on 29th and 30th April 1975. During the last days of the Vietnam War, more than 7,000 people were evacuated by helicopter from various points in Saigon. So that's what they based their rescue on. When Vice Admiral George P. Steele, the 7th Fleet commander, later stated that the sad part of the Marquez is that we had sufficient forces coming up with the 7th Fleet after it had been turned around for the evacuation of Vietnam stand down to seize southern Cambodia. I begged for another day or two rather than commit forces piecemeal as we did. The idea we could use U.S. Air Force, Air Police, and Air Force helicopters and assault force appears to me to be ridiculous today as it did then. Why was the intelligence and subsequent planning so bad? Why did they just leave the 3 American Marines? Where are their remains now? Why were they called deserters all these years? Why these three young Marines not receive a medal for above and beyond? Those are some of the questions we had. There's the pictures of Joseph. Highly encourage you to get the book, Bringing Joseph Home by Carrie Turner. Also, go back to On Demand for this show, and you can see some of the shows that Carrie has done about Joseph and how he's got the information together. But that was, I believe, was Danny Marshall's shirt that was they found. But that was the show. I appreciate you tuning in tonight. I hope you got something out of it. Our next show will be 14th of August. We'll be finishing up on the secrets and mysteries of the Vietnam War, Part 4. For those of you who live in the Triangle area of North Carolina, on 3rd of August, the month of calling out of the name ceremony of the 38 men from North Carolina who are still unaccounted for as a result of the war in Southeast Asia, will be held at the Vietnam Memorial on the Capitol grounds in Raleigh at 12 noon. Guest readers will be Al Meyer, chapter of the Order of the Purple Heart. That same night, the Wake Forest Purple Heart Foundation will be holding their yearly dinner honoring those who received the Purple Heart. On the 17th of August, the Triangle Purple Heart Foundation will be honoring Gold Star families and Purple Heart recipients at their first annual dinner. The month of August is Military Order of the Purple Heart. Tell your friends about the show and encourage them to tune in. We'll look forward to seeing you again on August 3rd. Months fly, don't they? And you have a good evening.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.